Baptist Church. Glad you're here this morning with us. To begin, you guys have been coming for quite a while. You know that my sermons aren't normal sermons that you hear at other churches. Each week I pray and I ask the Lord to give me what we need to talk about, what the subject matter is going to be. And I don't know why I get some of this content, some of this subject matter that he shares, but I know that someone needs to hear it today. And my goal is to provide a message that will allow you to be able to take the scriptures and use them daily in your lives, to apply them daily in your lives, to enrich your walk with the Lord and to draw you closer to God. And so if you will join me in prayer as we begin this morning. Lord, we know our tongues are, they often get ahead of our minds and our hearts, and we are quick to speak. And Lord, today we repent of our many thoughtless things that we've said. We are sorry for the words that we have spoken in anger or in gossip. Please, Lord, help us to see when we are about to speak without thinking, and to check our hearts. And help us to be slower to speak. Help us all, Lord, to be a person who is full of loving words, full of spirit and encouragement and overflowing with your joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and self-control. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So this morning, as you can tell by that opening prayer, we're going to talk about something that's close to a lot of our lives, and that's gossip, and that's the tongue. And it can get you in trouble. And, so I kind of opened up with a couple of lines here, like, psst, lean in, I got something to share with you. It's a secret, I can't tell anyone else. Or, I got something juicy to share with you. Just come on over here. It's between you and I. Or, I got suspicion about something that I really just want to vent with you. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about tongues and what words we say really do matter. The gossip out there, our ability and inability to be able to control our tongues and to speak more kindly. And, by doing this is going to improve our level of success that we enjoy in our personal relationships every single day. And so, let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles here. We actually have two scriptures we're going to look at here this morning. The first one's in Proverbs. In Proverbs, if you spend some time in Proverbs, there's a lot to be said about the tongue in Proverbs. There really is. And so, Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19. I'm sorry, verse 18. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 18. The one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. And I'll go ahead and read 19 as well. When there are many words, sin is unavoidable. But when one who controls his lips is prudent. And there's a lot more to be said in Proverbs. But let's go ahead then and turn over to James. James, towards the back of the Bible. James chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. That's chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. And this is again about controlling the tongue. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 8 in James. Not many should become teachers, my brothers, because you know that we will receive the stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is mature, able to control his whole body. Now if we put bits in our mouths and then into the mouths of horses, so that they obey us, we direct their whole bodies. And consider ships, though very large, are driven by fierce winds. They are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, and it boasts great things. Consider how a small fire sets ablaze a large forest, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among our members. It stains the whole body. It sets the course of life on fire, and itself set on fire by hell. Every kind of animal, bird, reptile, fish is tamed and has been tamed by humankind, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. May God add his blessing to the reading of our word, of his word this morning. So we're going to be talking about the tongue. And I'm going to open up with a little story. Gossip is like barnacles. Okay, I was listening to this podcast by, I think it was Stephen Mansfield, and he was talking about how barnacles tend to slow down sea vessels. And, to the effect of how gossip can also hurt our lives and our organizations, our businesses, our churches, and, it can slow all of that stuff down. And some of the facts discussed in this podcast include the following. Barnacles can slow down ships by as much as 40%. And that's reported by the U.S. Navy. Barnacles can get inside of an engine of a ship and can add weight to the hull. Barnacles can actually crack the hull of smaller ships and vessels. Barnacles diminish the aerodynamics of the boat, so it doesn't go straight and smooth. The number of barnacles multiply rapidly due to the constant reproduction of them. And this was staggering. The U.S. Navy spends roughly $500 million a year just to scrape the bottom of their boats. Gossip slows down your life, your business, your family, whatever mission you're on. And it affects the health of the body too. I like to say that. And there's a cost of dealing with gossip and negative words, but it surely is worth discussing and moving forward with it. I mean, there's no question that it's a good idea for us to teach our children and each other and to practice ourselves the art of speaking more carefully. And that's everywhere. Whether you're in a restaurant, whether you're at work, whether you're at church. And as I said, the book of Proverbs has so much to say about how we manage our words. And the ability and inability to control our tongues will determine, more than anything, the success that we enjoy in our relationships, in our families, and in our church, in our business relationships, and just out in the world. And if we can't seem to say the right things and constantly seem to say the wrong things, you end up finding yourself going day through day alone and alienated from everyone in life. Some people find it easy to express themselves and have no trouble saying everything that's on their mind. I'm sure we all know somebody like that. I mean, I do. And we usually refer to these people as maybe brilliant conversationalists. Sometimes. Some of them can talk on and on and on and use countless words and never get around to saying anything at all. Sounds like a lot of our political leaders nowadays. But I guess But we all know that there's more to speaking effectively than being able to just string together some lovely words. I was watching this, my wife and I, we tend to watch a lot of TCM, like a lot of old movies, and we stream like old TV shows and stuff. And we were watching an old Dick Van Dyke show a while back. And he was at this party. Dick Van Dyke was at this party with all these smart intellectual people, and Dick got trapped into like this little side conversation with this like self-absorbed philosophy professor dude. And one of the other guests said, "Isn't Dr. So-and-so so brilliant?" And Dick Van Dyke said, "He has the ability to say things which are on the surface seemingly vague, but in reality are actually meaningless." And that sums up the way many people make conversation today. Our Bibles teach us a different approach to conversation. It teaches us to use words sparingly and speak with caution. I was reading the other day that if you go through the Ten Commandments, it contains 297 words. And then Psalm 23 has 118 words. And the Lord's Prayer has 56 words. Yet the recent report from the Department of Agriculture, they needed 15,000 words to discuss the price of eggs. It's not using a lot of words that makes a difference. It's using the right words. So we need to get into a habit moving forward. Get into this habit of speaking more carefully. We need to learn to think first and talk second. And today we're going to focus on the think part a little bit before we speak. There's some things that we need to consider. First, we should consider not saying anything at all when we really want to. I'm going to tell you something that if some of you will take it to heart, will absolutely liberate you. It will revolutionize your relationships. So, here we go. We're going to go through this together. First, we don't have to say everything that we know. Imagine being out with friends one evening and this group, they're all together and they're discussing things like music, for example, popular music. And one lady named an artist and said, "Oh, he's absolutely my favorite. I'm so blessed to listen to his music. He is awesome." And then another person at the table chimes in and says, "Oh, really? Well, the person at my church was in a 12-step group for overeaters, and that singer is also part of that overeaters group. And he's a bulimic. He's been gorging and purging himself since he was a teenager." Okay? Well, we didn't need to hear all that, right? We didn't need to hear about the gorging and the purging while they were trying to eat and enjoy themselves. And there's a reason why those groups have this name like anonymous associated with it in the title. It's about privacy. It's about confidentiality. And those things should be respected. But in today's society, a lot of people don't care about that. And babbling, that little bit of inside information did not build up the group, did not educate the group, did not bring glory to Christ at all. Just because we know something about someone doesn't mean that we spill it out with others. Now, if at some time in the future this particular musician decides to publicly come out and share his struggle, and we've seen that, share his struggle with addiction, then that's his choice. But until then, it's his personal business, and we shouldn't be out there sharing it. And something about someone, but just because you know it and just because it's true doesn't mean that you have to say it at all to anybody. You can keep it right here. If what you say does not build up others and does not bring glory to the name of Christ, then you're better off keeping your mouth shut. I know that's hard to take. Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 27, a man of knowledge uses words with restraint. Before we speak, let's consider saying nothing at all, because we don't have to say everything that we know. And secondly, we don't have to say everything we think. There's a lot of folks like that. Some people believe that they know a little bit more than about the subject content than anyone else, and they believe that it's their duty to, whatever chance they get, to present that. And whenever the subject matter comes up, the conversation, whether it's about the stock market or the politics or news or criminal justice or football or religion, whatever it is, they believe that they are the first and final word on the matter. And of course, they got to share it with you. We can all fall into this habit unintentionally, but we need to watch out for it. We need to watch out for it. I mean, have you ever met someone who constantly says out loud everything that he or she is thinking? No matter what subject comes up in the conversation, they've got a take on it. They are self-proclaimed authority on anything and everything, because because of this, I should say, they are also the object of jokes among people. And you may be that person. We don't have to say everything that we think, friends. Before we speak, we need to understand and have this principle of silence in mind. Silence, I love this, silence looks like knowledge. So remember, think first and speak second. Third, we can give the impression that we are wise if we keep silent. Solomon says in Proverbs 17, verse 28, even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent. And I took this verse to heart about 9 years ago when I started a job for a software company. I was on my first week, and I was spending all this time absorbing so much information, all this technical jargon, all these acronyms, all these things just being thrown at me like I was drinking out of a fire hydrant. It was overwhelming. And, they just, as I sat there through all the training day after day, words that I didn't understand just kept flying out, such as config.sys, or readability, or buffering, and on and on. And throughout the meetings, I kept kind of nodding and, I can't argue with that. I agree with that. And then as we began talking about a specific project, I actually knew something about it. And so then I was able to significantly contribute to that project and to that discussion. My comments carried more weight because I hadn't blown my credibility trying to talk about something that I knew nothing about. And, I must say, I did end up that first week, because of all the information, because of all that stuff going through, I actually got sick and ended up throwing up my first week, actually on the job in the office. It was pretty embarrassing. But, that happens. We get overwhelmed. But you know what? I just kept quiet, and I learned. So we don't have to repeat everything that we hear. The problem with repeating gossip is that there is a better than ever chance that what we heard isn't completely true. Gossip tends to get embellished as it's passed along. Like, you remember, when you were kids, and your teacher would say something in the kid's ear in the back of the line, and then each kid would have to repeat it clear down to the end. And by the time the topic was shared here to here, it's a totally different result. and it wasn't even a full minute, Things can be embellished. The subject of gossip is one that we don't take seriously enough in today's society. We say things like, hey, you know what, I'm going to visit so-and-so and catch up on the latest gossip. That's pretty common. Or we say things like, you know what, there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of you catching up with gossip. Some people say it's a figure of speech, but it is all too often too accurate. When we are talking, when we are in conversations, even phone calls. We need to begin to take gossip more seriously. In Proverbs, in Proverbs 16, chapter 16, verse 28, it says, a perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff right there. Proverbs is full of that. That's something to think about. Does it ever occur to us that when we talk about, or when we talk bad about someone, that God considers our actions perverted or a problem? It may seem hard to believe, but that is what it says in the Bible. And in my humble opinion, the truer it is, the juicier it is, but the more despicable it is in the eyes of God if we repeat it. God would much rather us keep quiet. Solomon also said in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 9, he who covers an offense promotes love, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. Repeating everything that we hear can rip apart and destroy friendships. This is why we need to think before we speak and consider whether we should say anything at all. We don't have to repeat everything that we hear. We should consider whether or not we have all the facts. The first step to managing our mouth is to consider not saying anything at all. The second step is discerning whether or not we have all the facts to make that call. I'm sure a lot of you remember Richard Jewell. That name probably rings a bell. He was the security guard who was first on the scene for the bombing of the 1996 Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta. He acted courageously. And he was indeed a hero. And then, as is typical in such events in our world, the FBI developed suspicion around Joel and began to consider him a suspect, and then it ended up going into the news. I think that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution printed a story packed with innuendos and falsehoods and misleading comments, and then the New York Post called him a fat former failed sheriff's deputy, and it just went on and on and on. And even the famous reporter Tom Brokaw was compromised. His credibility was compromised, was saying that they probably have enough information to arrest him right now. Probably enough to prosecute him, and probably enough to convict him. But as it turns out, as we all know, Richard Jewell was innocent. He did not plant a bomb. He was a hero. He put his life in danger for others. But the media, and the number of news organizations, including NBC, settled with Jewell for an undisclosed amount of funds. And it had to, they didn't want to go through this trial of humiliation that the media would go through, which we're seeing now play out on other issues. But he was exonerated over 88 days afterwards. And so this event kind of teaches us some things. For instance, just because a journalist or a news channel says something, it does not mean that it's true. We need to remember that when we watch the news, that there is a very real possibility that we're only getting a fraction of the story. Or it can be totally false, who knows. Another thing that is taught that this specific thing has caused. We can do a lot of damage by speaking before we have all the facts. And some of the damage caused by speculation and speaking will come back our way. We were just talking about that. We may never find ourselves in the kind of jam that the news media was involved in, reporting lies about a guy. But then, we may never find ourselves in that same sort of quagmire or problem, but we can be sure that if we open our mouths before we get the facts, we are counting or courting disaster for ourselves and for everyone else who's involved. Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13, "He who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame." He who answers before listening, that is his folly and shame. And I remember a few years ago, I worked for a large company and I watched my boss fly off the handle. He had a bit of a temper. He thought he had been overbilled by a company for printing costs. And he screamed at this employee, saying, "Hey, why didn't you catch this mistake?" And they yelled at the printer, and it got really, really, really ugly. Then a little while later, he found out that he was wrong, and he apologized to one of my coworkers, but it was too late. It was too late. The coworker had already resigned. He then called the printer and he asked if he could get his contract back after saying, "You know what, take that contract and go." And the printer said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll renew your contract, but it's going to be at a higher rate." That 15 minutes that he spent jumping to the wrong conclusion ended up costing our organization dearly. You see how powerful words are? And again, it reminds me of what Solomon said in Proverbs, where it says, a fool's talk brings a rod to his back, but the lips of the wise protect him. This is why we have to think before we speak. Let's make sure that we have all the facts, and remember that a man's knowledge uses words with restraint. Let's speak carefully after considering whether or not we have all the facts before we open our mouths. And then finally, we should consider the best ways to say what needs to be said. We don't live in this Pollyanna, overwhelmingly optimistic world here. And sometimes we have to say things that aren't pleasant to say. But our words, as I've just shared, carry a lot of weight and a lot of meaning. And so we need to take more effort in what we say and how we say it. And then in Proverbs 15, there's so much in Proverbs. We just go through and through and through. Proverbs 15, it says, "A man finds joy in an apt reply, and how good is a timely word." It takes effort and it takes a lot of thought to make sure we say the right words, the right way, and at the right time. A state trooper pulled over a man and his wife for speeding. They were on this deserted road, and they were really cruising. And since the road was clear and the weather was fine, the trooper told them, "You know what? I'm going to let you off with a warning." He even complimented the man and his wife for wearing their seatbelts. It's pretty cool. It's good. And then at that point, the woman leaned over to the window and said, "Well, officer, when you drive the speeds we do, you have to wear your seatbelt." That's when the state trooper decided to go ahead and write that ticket after all. So that's an example of what can happen when you don't think before you speak. It's also an example of not considering the best way to share something, right? I wish my wife was here. She'd appreciate this one. I like the heel of a loaf of bread. I've always loved the heel of a loaf of bread. George is the same way. You get them you go to the restaurant, you get the heel of the bread. Love that. But there's this old story of this man who fixed his wife a sandwich. One of the pieces of the bread he used was a heel, which is, I love that. I mean, I think that's the greatest part. And so when he gave the sandwich to her, she blew up. And I know my wife would do the same thing, actually. I am so sick of you giving me the heel of the sandwich the heel of the bread every time you make me a sandwich. You've been doing this for 20 plus years. Why do you insist on giving me the heel every single time? And then the husband looked and said quietly, because the heel is the favorite part. That's my favorite part. So now that guy knew the right thing to say. And apparently understood what Solomon meant when he said, a gentle answer turns away wrath. All men should remember this. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Remember that message.
I do it all the time.
There you go. Yeah, if you need to comfort your spouse or your child or employee or anyone you're dealing with in a relationship, you need to take time to find the right way to go about sharing and talking and speaking. You need to ask yourself, how can I say this in such a way that's going to build them up? How can I say this in such a way that's going to encourage them? How can I share or be an example of Jesus to these folks? We need to learn how to communicate in a gentler manner. The final proverb that I wanted to touch on, there's actually just two more. He who guards his lips, or I should say, he who guards his lips guards his life, but he who speaks rashly will come to ruin. Words have tremendous, tremendous power. There is great danger in talking too much, especially when we talk before we think. When words are many, I think I shared this week, when words are many, sin is not absent. But he who holds his tongue is wise. That's Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19. We don't have to take a vow of silence, but we all could benefit by making a commitment to think before we speak. And when we are thinking, we need to consider whether or not to say something at all. You know, that gossip, it's not worth it. We can consider the facts. We can consider the best ways to share and the best time to share. In guarding our lips this way, we guard our lives, we strengthen our relationships, and we build up others to a closer walk with Christ. And so today, gossip may be something that you're dealing with. Gossip, anger, unkind words. Maybe there's something in your life that doesn't seem to be working well. And you've tried your own way to solve it. Everyone has questions in their lives. If you haven't found those answers, there's something I would encourage you to do. Why not listen to what God has to say? God has all the answers that are grounded in truth and in love. Jesus has answers to problems that we are facing every day. I mean, when you walk through this door today, you did not walk through these doors by accident. You walk through these doors maybe with a heavy burden in your heart. What is God stirring in your heart today? If you want to change your life, if you want to have a new purpose for living, enjoy true joy and peace, you can decide right now for the Lord. You can come up, take a few short steps, and decide right now. And those few short steps will change your life forever. God sees the sparrow fall, and he also knows and has each of the hairs of your head counted and numbered. And he loves you that personally. Salvation is not just inviting Jesus into your life, it's him becoming your life. It's him taking over your life. So you can make a decision right now to seal this message in your heart. There are a few ways you can do it. If there's something burning right now in your heart, a burden, you can come forward. We will pray with you and pray for you. You can talk to Norma. You can talk to any one of us. We'd be glad to pray with you. And you're probably thinking, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I'm not sure. Just let God handle it. Come on. If you want to rededicate your life, if you want to become a member of our church, if you want to learn more about believers' baptism, if you have something on your heart, there's no pressure. You can come as you are. Jesus took all of your wrongs and gave you all of his rights. All of the rights. If you believe that and you commit to him, your life will never be the same. Believing in Jesus is the first step on the greatest journey of your life. You haven't finished the race. You're just getting started. The best, I assure you, with Jesus is yet to come. So you can come forward, you can raise your hand. If you don't feel comfortable coming up, we've got some cards in the back. You can leave your information. Then we'll contact you. We'll reach out to you. We'll call you. And we'll pray with you. So what is the Lord leading for you today? You're welcome to come up during our invitation hymn. Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine, on page 446.